Hey, this is Steve in Dallas, Texas. It's Saturday morning, my friend, and you are listening to Light Talk.
Well, good morning. This is Stan in Gainesville, Florida, and today we are discussing Sidelight, console upgrade, dance floors, and frying your console, all on Light Talk.
Sidelight. And this is David in the beautiful Belmont Shore neighborhood of Long Beach, California. And if you don't already know, you are listening to Light Talk, and we are the Lumen Brothers. So welcome, everyone, to episode 189. And you know what we have right off the bat?
189.
We have news from Election Central. Because the last time in 188, we had no idea who won the election.
We had a pretty good speculation.
But boy, were we off.
Well, the polls, if we were anything like the polls, they had canceled us a long time ago.
Boy, the polls really suck.
I am ignoring them from now on. The only poll that matters is the big one.
I don't know if the polls are off.
88% chance of a Biden win. Okay, I guess that's...
If you go back and look at it, the kind of contested states, if you take your Democratic sunglasses off, it was showing Biden was up by maybe a point or a point and a half, which is in the margin of error. Everybody's
they had 3 points up in Arizona. I don't know.
And they had 8 points in Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
it was 8 to 10 in Pennsylvania, and even further in Wisconsin and Michigan. So, I mean, Pennsylvania was the closest, as according to polls.
Depends on who you're looking at, too. But the polls.
No, but I did a poll. I did,
538.
The average polls, polls. But anyway, so here we are, and we're taping this on a Tuesday, and guess what? We do know who won the election.
Well, it depends on who you ask.
Well, that's true. Everybody has their own opinions, but congratulations to Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and their families. And I must tell you, it was thrilling to watch those post-election speeches, because that last shot of them with those beautiful kids on stage, that little girl holding the American flag, brought tears to my eyes. Can
I make a shout out to one of our Light Talk listeners? Matt Jenseko, who's an old friend of mine, used to be my electrician, works for PRG. He does these big gigs like the Super Bowl and these political conferences. And he was doing the show in Delaware. And we were chatting, and he was sending me pictures of himself behind Biden's podium with his boots on, and gave me a little heads up that there was going to be an incredible drone show, but not to tell anybody. Wow. So I just told my students they were the only ones to keep their eye out for the drone show. And so thanks, Matt, for all of that insight. And he's going to come and do some master classes for us at UF. And what a great guy. And really, watched him come up through school and his career. And he gets those gigs because he's good. So thanks, Matt. And thanks for helping that Biden campaign look so beautiful that night.
And, that's hard to do. I thought that whole production was amazing.
It was.
Because it was, again, they had one extra day because they thought they were going to do it the day before. But still, doing something like that outdoors, and the sound was great.
Well, he was waiting. Great. He was saying, I've been here, it's like he was waiting and waiting. We can't. And I kind of made a post. I said, well, Matt, keep them warm. And he goes, yeah, they're warm. And I think once we got the word, he said, okay, we're rolling. We're going to start pushing some buttons.
I think, to be fair about this, I do think we have to, a little tip of the hat to Rudy Giuliani down at the Four Seasons Landscaping Company.
The Four Seasons Landscape. right across the street from the Foxy Bookstore.
And next to the crematorium. I have to say, I don't mean to beat up on him too much, but I have to say, he ignored it. He just stood there and he gave his speech, and it didn't matter if they were unloading some manure behind him. He went for it.
When you're that drunk, nothing registers.
And the smoke was coming out of the crematorium, and there was a box of sex toys showing up at the Fantasy Island.
That was his favorite store, I heard. Have you seen him in Borat? I mean, he does this great role in Borat. I urge everyone to watch that film. Hey, Steve, what do you think of that drone show?
It was great. I think, it's, let's see where they all go. Let's see what happens with drones. If that's going to be, just it gets better and better and better, or if they've kind of topped out right now and no one can afford it.
You know what amazes me is how do they stay so stable when there's wind? I mean, is there a certain threshold that they can't fly these things? I mean, how does that work?
They did have, I saw some data on wind speed, and they were worried about that at the Winter Olympics. When they did that big drone show coming down the ski run. They were worried about it there. And they also, I vaguely remember someone mentioning that at LDI, that
Yeah, so there's a certain threshold that they can do the drone show up until wind gusts of 20 miles an hour or something, I assume. But that was pretty damn cool. I loved the programming on that. I was amazed. I was very impressed with that.
Yeah, it was nice to see how they went to a strobe when the others were reconfiguring.
Yes,
so you had like a mask.
Very smart.
The other thing that I read that I think is true is that there's actually a head drone. Like a flock of geese, there's like the one at the front that is sort of the leader, and it sort of it transmits the data out to all the others. And if it fails, there's another one who's like the deputy head zone drone who comes in place. So there's sort of a shared responsibility for the data transmission among the flock, so to speak. Really, I would like to learn more about it, and I hope, as Steve said, I hope it does just get better, and I hope that the costs come down. I could. Remember when Steve was sort of hinting about drones a couple of years ago as a lighting design tool? It's wonderful. It's sort of
I don't refer to it anymore as a flock of geese. I think a flock of geese.
I refer to it as a flock of geese.
You never will again, because that is so 5 minutes ago. They are more like a fluffle, F-L-U-F-F-L-E. They're more like a fluffle of rabbits.
Okay. You insist.
I thought it was a gaggle of geese. Was that a gaggle of something else?
When they fly in a flock, they're flying in formation.
No, that's seagulls. Flock of seagulls.
Geese fly in flocks.
Oh, okay.
And it's a flock of geese too.
For migration, and they cut the wind resistance. Back to your point about wind, they fly in a V shape, and the head goose, who happens to be at the front of the V, has to work the hardest. And then actually, here's some other interesting thing about geese.
Oh my God.
That when the head goose gets tired,
welcome to Geese Talk.
Just listen to me. He or she does not go to the second or third position. They drop to the very back of the V where there's the most pull, and they have to work the least. So at the front, you're working the hardest, and at the back, you're working the least. It's a shared responsibility.
Unlike a murder of crows, they just fly all over the place.
It's a very, very collaborative species.
It all sounds foul.
That sounds foul. That's good. That's funny. But geese are very collaborative. They share the burden.
All right, let's get on to our other bit of news, and that is there's a new lighting console out. Is that right, Steve? I saw it on our website today. What is it? It's the new Strand.
It's the new Neo.
New Neo.
It's going to be fantastic.
Ooh, really?
And I know we can't talk about it today, but someday soon we'll be able to talk about the news that Stan is setting on also. And I think that's going to be fantastic too.
Wow, that's a lot of fantastic news that I have no idea what it is, but that's okay.
Neither do I. What am I sitting on?
And
let me get up and look underneath and see if there's something down there.
And also in the news, there's a new red alert out.
Yes,
I saw that.
Now that we have hopefully a new administration, things may start moving in our industry again. Actually, there's a notification on our Facebook page, so please check it out. We don't have total details now, but just check out our Facebook page and it's all there. So that being said, let's get started with our first listener question that Steve has.
Rick in Maine writes, my teacher yelled at me today for unplugging and then plugging DMX into a console that was turned on. He said I could have fried the board. Well, Rick, you just yell right back at him. So I'm not saying you couldn't, but I would say you'd had to put a big, mighty effort into it of simply plugging and unplugging DMX into a console to short the console out. I've thought about that a little bit, and I'm certainly no expert, and I'm sure someone from ETC or Random A or High End will weigh in on our Light Talk Facebook page and say, well, yes, you could. But I don't think you can. I mean, most consoles, and I'm not a console developer, have an optical isolator in them. So that's a kind of a two-part little component there. You plug your cable in, and then there's no contact, no electrical contact there. It's the signal is transmitted by light to stop that very thing from happening. So I think the optical isolator on the board would save it from anything. So I've never heard of a DMX signal frying a console. What have you guys run into that?
Well, I haven't, and I've certainly done that. I've certainly plugged and unplugged the DMX line from a console while it was on without any negative impact. But it does remind me of a story. Stan, story time.
Oh my God, I'm going to get something to eat.
Do you have some music for that?
Well, hang on. Before we get into that story, let me just wrap up with Rick here.
Go ahead.
I would say, Rick, I think your teacher yelling at you, I think he or she experienced this. I think what happened was when he or she was a little lighting designer, they were plugging their console in and the console went boom. And they happened to be holding the DMX cable in their hand. So I think probably something happened, but I think it had nothing to do with the DMX cable, and now your teacher has been scarred for life.
Exactly. He dumped the Coca-Cola on it. That's what happened.
He's been blaming himself for frying an ion somewhere.
He maybe had a Pepsi syndrome.
That's right, the Pepsi syndrome.
But let me tell a little story. So this is pre-DMX. And you guys will remember that we used to send signal to the dimmers with 0 to 10 volt or other protocols. And in the theater that I was the lighting director in, we had 64 strand dimmers, and we had, I think, 6 non-dims. And the non-dims had switches, on stage, right, to turn the work lights on and off and so on. Well, inside the big rack downstairs in the dim room for the non-dims, there were these, they were mercury relay switches. It was like a round object, and it had contacts at either end, and it used mercury. And by changing the direction of the current, the mercury would actually make a contact or not make a contact, and that's how the non-dims worked. And you heard them go like a contact closure, and you hear this thunk, right? Well, one day we're just all standing on stage doing nothing, and we hear this boom, right? Explosion. Right? And all the lights go off. And we're like, what the heck happened? Now, interestingly, all of the low voltage lines, which would have been in those days, pre-DMX, how the control signal was sent, were in the same cabinet with these relays. And when the relay exploded, the liquid mercury and sparks basically fried the insulation on the cable harnesses. And what happened is the board did get fried through line voltage coming up through the low voltage lines into the console. How odd was that? And it did fry the console, and we had to take it out to New Jersey to Joel Rubin and those guys out there at Strand in New Jersey, and they replaced the motherboard because it did take line voltage up the control line. So maybe the lesson is, if somehow you had line voltage got on your DMX line, that would be a way in which you could fry your board.
And you know something? That is the perfect segue into our next question, Stan.
Okay. Which is Alex, who happens to be in Texas, and he writes, when...
Or she. She could be a she.
It should be Alexandra.
Let me re-say. And our next question comes from Alex, gender unknown, in Texas, who writes, when should I replace my lighting console? Now, I have like a funny answer and then maybe a more serious one. Well, I would say when you have the money might be one thing, but really an assessment of, do you need it, right? So I think the first question is, do you need it or do you want it? So sometimes you get what you need, sometimes you get what you want. So if it's serving the purpose, even if it's old and you're familiar with it and it does what you need it to do, stick with it. Now, on another point, if you can't get parts for it, that might be another consideration if it's out of service, right? Now, I did discover recently, which I didn't know, I'm sure Steve does, there's a company in Texas called Light Parts. That's a real resource. Lightparts.com. They got everything. And so that's something you want to check on. So can you keep it running, right? Or are you now doing things with new technologies, LEDs? Are your aesthetics changing, where there are things you want to do that your console can no longer do, then it might be time to look for that. So that's sort of how I'm thinking about it. And a third point might be, if your theater is in a place where you're a little insecure, I don't know how you feel about things, but if you're insecure that your light board could crap out, or it has crapped out and impacted your running of your show or something, well, if it still works and you can keep it working and you want to have a backup, then that might be another reason, is to have two consoles so you have a backup. We're doing that in a facility right now where they have a console that they're happy with. And we said, well, do you want a new console? And they said, actually, yes, because we're going to be moving to more moving lights, more LEDs, and this console is a little cumbersome. But they said, fine, we'll do that. We'll spec you a new console, but we'll stay with the same, you might stay with a similar manufacturer so that your old console becomes your backup in the event that something goes on. So those are sort of my general thoughts on when you should.
But that if you're going to buy a new console, a backup console, you got to make sure it's compatible with the one that you have.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's the important thing.
Absolutely.
Light boards are not cell phones. They don't have planned obsolescence.
That's true.
And sort of backing up what Stan was saying, if it works for you, then use it and, keep using it. You don't need the latest and greatest if you're doing very simple shows. Not even very simple shows, even moderate shows. Mm-hmm. It's like, do you need an Ion or do you need an EOS?
Steve won't let you have a Nomad, though.
I agree with Steve on this one.
I mean, all you got to do is go back and look at Broadway shows, and they do not want to change consoles.
Right.
They do not want to take a VL2 down and put a VL3 up. I mean, every time you start messing with your show, that's a danger.
Yeah.
And also, do you have time, for them, do you have time to flip the show? So David's absolutely right. If it's working for you, then why change it?
That's what I said.
It's like a car. I mean, if you have a car that runs really well and it's ran for like 30 years, why change it if you don't need it? Unless you want to go to electric, and that's a whole other story. I usually keep cars for a long time. I keep cars for 10, 20 years.
Yeah,
and I'm going to keep my car for at least 10 years. And that's just the way it is. Remember Ross Perot?
Of course.
Ross Perot was a guy, who's a billionaire, I guess he was. Or
Electronic Data Systems, EDS.
Yes, right, EDS. And he ran for president at one time.
I voted for him, actually, believe it or not.
And I was living in Dallas at the time when he was running for president, and I saw him at Dickey's Barbecue. And, and he wasn't there he was there alone. He was just eating lunch, right? It wasn't when he was actually running for president. It was the year he was running. It was before he was running. So he had no Secret Service stuff. He just went to Dickey's. And I watched, and he went outside and got in his car. And you know what he was driving?
A Pinto.
No, a 1975 Ford Fairlane.
Sure, beautiful car, beautiful car.
But it was like 20 years old.
But it was classic, I bet.
Not at the time.
Not at the time.
Not at the time.
It was a piece of crap at the time, okay?
Oh, come on.
No, it was, but it ran. And so I'm thinking, wow, maybe that wasn't Ross Perot. And a few months later, I'm listening to I'm reading a Forbes article, and they're interviewing Ross Perot, and they said, what's your secret to being a multimillionaire? And you know what he said? Never buy a new car. He says, hold on to your car. He goes, I never bought a new car in my life.
Because cars are liabilities. They're liabilities.
Yeah,
they're not investments. They don't appreciate in value. Unless you're lucky like me, I have one that is appreciating in value.
So apply that same philosophy to your lighting board. If it works and it runs and you can get it repaired, like Stan said, then hang on to it. So there you go.
I want to throw in here, since we've had Alex and her replacing the light console, and we've had Rick, who's talking about DMX. I have a puzzler.
I haven't had one of those in a long time.
I want to toss a puzzler in there. I want to throw the gauntlet down. Why are dimmer racks? Why are they 48 and 96? Why don't we have 100 in a dimmer rack? Why is 96?
I do know why.
Well, don't give it away.
You don't get to compete.
You don't get to compete. You've been disqualified, Stan.
Okay.
Sorry. Just a listener thing. Okay, that's a good question. A good puzzler. We'll have the answer next week for you.
Why are the configurations in 24, 48, 96? Yeah.
That's it.
So whoever wins gets a what? Should we give him a free ticket to the Faroe Islands?
Stan sends him his Ross Perot t-shirt.
The Ross Perot t-shirt.
I might have a Ross Perot button somewhere. That would
I'm going to be honest. I voted for Ross Perot.
Did you?
Yeah, I voted for. I liked him. I liked the idea that he went to Dickies and he was driving a Ford Fairlaine.
He was a down to earth guy.
My favorite though was his running mate. Remember him?
That was a problem. That was the early Sarah Palin choice, right?
Why am I here? Why am I here? Who am I? Why am I here? That was my favorite opening line to a debate ever. So Jade in North Carolina writes, "When should I use Sidelight?"
Always.
Stan gave you my answer.
I'm done.
All the
I'm
time.
finished.
All the time. Why not? Why wouldn't you use Sidelight? What does Sidelight do?
Because your brain loves it.
Oh, that's right. You talked about this on the show like 3 years ago.
There's a very biological reason why.
Well, you probably can't use Sidelight when the director says, I need some more backlight.
Right.
Well, if your scenic designer blocks your wings, you may have some difficulty.
Well, mirrors. Right?
But David has those wonderful opera ladders that can fly up and down, which I love.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Not always. But anyway, okay, yes, all the time. I mean, I can't imagine doing a show without Sidelight, although I have done shows without Sidelight because the scene designer put a box set in with no room for Sidelight. So I usually take a light and I hide it somewhere. I have to get Sidelight somewhere.
You make them cut a hole in the scenery, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And I have done that, actually. I've worked with several scene designers who are saying, this is great, but, can I put a slot right here? We figured out where to put a slot, and I was able to get Sidelight in there. I was doing a show, actually, in Toronto, Lady Macbeth of Mitsensk, and we did this amazing set. Kevin Knight was the set designer on that show. And it was this unbelievable set, but I needed this slot. I just needed a position, and he's such a great, great collaborator. He said, okay, show me where, and we'll figure it out. And I did, and it was like, okay, and he designed it right into the set. It was awesome. And this is done all the time, when you're working on big shows like that, because it is essential to be able to get Sidelight in a lot of situations. So yeah, all the time. Low, high Sidelight, medium Sidelight, top of the boom Sidelight, head highs, shin kickers, stuff from out in front, put them on the ground, pitch shins, things like that. The more, the better.
Any way you can get it. Isn't that a song?
Any way you want it, that's the way you need it. That one. Who's that? It's a Journey song. Okay, so
you are listening to Light Talking Guys, and today Light Talk is sponsored by.
From south of the border, it's Bad Hombre Stage Productions. The warning signs of cable is silent, but it can be very serious. Here are a few clues that your theater may have major electrical problems and what you can do. Do you notice the foul odor of cable burn? Well, replace that faulty cable now with our newest product from Bad Hombre Stage Productions, L-Wire. The outer jacket of L-Wire is made from recycled porta potties, so you'll never notice the smell of burning odor again.
Oh, jeez.
What about overly warm cable? With L-Wire, you will never be bothered by the heat as each cable is embedded with asbestos. And I'm not talking that crap from the 1980s. I'm talking about the good stuff from cement factories and military industrial complex of the 1950s. And it's wrapped in muffler tape. And finally, the problem of breakers tripping every 5 minutes. With every spool of L-Wire, we will also toss in a half dozen never-trip breakers. L-Wire from Bad Hombre Stage Productions for theaters who don't wear masks or refuse to wash their hands.
I like that. The never trip breakers, they probably never have a fire either.
We don't need your stinking wires.
And now, back to the Light Talkers.
Well, the sound of those crazy ducks tells us that once again, it's time for another episode of Let's Talk About. And today's Let's Talk About subject happens to be, when do you tell a student that they are not going to succeed in graduate or undergraduate school? And what are the signs that they may have chosen the wrong profession? Well, the three of us have been teaching graduates and undergraduates for a long time.
Don't mention how long.
Very long time. And we have seen this. We have been a part of it. We recruit students. But you know something? Recruiting is not 100% successful,
It's
right?
a box of chocolates.
It's a box of chocolates. But
You never know what you're going to get.
And sometimes you're surprised, and sometimes pleasantly, and sometimes disappointed. And this does occur. But we're pretty good. I mean, you know, I'd say we're pretty good. But this profession is not for everyone. And sometimes it takes working in a somewhat pressurized situation of school to realize that. Now, again, this is one of the most difficult things we do. It may be the most difficult things we do, and that is when we put students on probation and we work with them and try to make it successful. But sometimes that's not even going to happen. Sometimes it does. I was put on probation. Did I ever tell you guys that? My first semester.
That's how I was going to answer the question, because the question was when. And I think it's at the end of a probationary period, because sometimes a probationary period is all somebody needs.
Right.
They just need a bit of a warning to, like, you know, shape up, or else
that's what I needed.
Yeah,
and
right.
I did,
and sometimes you
shape
need
up.
it, and that's not a bad thing. That's part of the growing process.
And many of my students have shaped up too. But I must say the probation thing is probably 50-50. I don't know about in your cases.
I haven't collected statistics.
Yeah, well, I haven't either, but I'm guessing. And I think that there are several things that you look for. One is keeping up with the work, the school work and the production work. Two is also how well that person fits in the community of the theater. And I've had some people who didn't have a lot of theater background, but they were fantastic artists, and I took a chance on them. And a lot of them succeeded, and some of them did not. And usually it's because being a theater person, it's a totally different environment. And you could be the greatest artist in the world, but if you're not part of that synergetic community and you can't open yourself up, and both for ideas and also for criticism, then you're going to have issues. And that has happened as well. But sometimes it's a lack of focus too. So I don't know. What do you guys think?
December, you take your student in August, December, you kind of know right there whether that student has a future, I think. You don't have to necessarily cut them from the program at the end of 3 or 4 months. But I think the first semester gives you a lot of information about where that student's head is. And then, so for me, December. And then I give them a semester to kind of see what they're going to do. But in a perfect world, I cut people in the first year.
Right. That's where you want to do it. That has to be done the first year.
Yeah, it's hard if you're cutting someone in the second year, because that's almost cruel. They've put a lot of effort in, and also the universities have invested a lot of money in them. It's interesting. I look at students that I've had over the years, and some of the ones who succeed are just kind of inches ahead of the other people in the room. That doesn't mean the other people should be cut. That's a different topic. But usually success isn't measured in yards. They just come to class and they've done the one extra drawing. They've done just a little bit more research. They're just a little bit more prepared. Because they all basically kind of have the same undergraduate training, and they all kind of have the same resume. When you go to IRTA, it's rare that you see a student who isn't kind of like everybody else in the room. I get a good sense in that first semester how invested they are in the program. Now, there's other things you have to consider when you're looking at them very hard in that first semester. Sometimes it's their first time away from home. They may have gone to a local college, in their community. Also, they're going to a different city any way you cut it. So they're having to get used to Dallas. They're all of a sudden, and I mean this in all kindness, they're nobody. They have worked very hard at their undergraduate school, and for 4 years, they've kind of risen to the top, and they're the ones who are designing shows, and they're the ones who are leading maybe My Friend the Lico class, but they've got some street cred, and now they come to a new program, and they're back where they were when they were freshmen. But it's kind of nice because they can also reinvent themselves.
They can reinvent themselves. I love that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's one thing I tell the students. I said, just think of the opportunities you have now because you can totally reinvent yourself. And it's so exciting. Yeah.
You know, the other thing I would say, and I'll just pass it off to Stan, is you also have to be kind of on the watch out to see if they have selected the wrong school. They may just be at the wrong place. And your program, no matter how good your program is, your program isn't going to fulfill their needs. So
but Stan's may, or mine may.
Right.
No, it's absolutely, boy, those are really great points, Steve.
But both of you guys make great points. I'm trying to think of what's left for me to say. You know, Steve's point about knowing in the first year is true. We have a saying around here that we kind of feel like the student in the first year, they either check in or they're checking out. And at some point, they're faced with a decision. Am I really going to be here or am I going to be halfway here? And I think they come, even if the student has been out in the profession for a while, they have an imagined idea of what grad school is. And then when they get here, it's like, oh, this is not exactly what I had it in my imagination. This is the reality of it. And maybe it doesn't match up. And then they have to make a decision about whether they're really here or whether they're not here. And I think I see that happen all the time. And the other thing that happens is in that first year, students come to school, why? To get better, right, at what they do, right? That's the goal, isn't it? And sometimes the malady, or let's say the disease that needs to be remedied or improved or healed is unknown. And we sort of play if you let me torture the metaphor, we sort of play the doctor in a way. It's like, here's where you can be better. And sometimes they hear it and they go, yep, that's my weakness. And that's what I really want to improve that. And if you've got that, back to Steve's point of taking the criticism and everything else, you're going to get better. But if you identify where the weakness is, whether it's a sociological thing, like David pointed out, whether it's an artistic thing, whether it's a motivation thing, whatever it might be, if they say, yeah, that's my thing, can you help me improve? Then the answer is always yes, right?
So guys, how about undergraduate students?
Same thing applies, I think. If they're in a BFA track, a professional training program, then it's the same rules apply, I think.
Yeah, Steve, I know you're not teaching undergrads right now. And now that's all I'm teaching are undergrads. It's really interesting with the undergrads, I must say.
They're awesome. My undergrads are awesome.
They're always awesome. But undergrads are really interesting because every now and then you'll get this amazing undergrad and you want to see that passion. It usually has to do with passion. And then you want to help them. You want to steer them. You want to help them out and get them into a good grad school or get them into the profession, whatever it takes. And then there's some people that may be, lagging behind a bit, but it's not because of their fault, but good. They're working a job. They're taking care of their families. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. And a lot of it has to do with the demographics of the students who I'm teaching now. But they're also great artists. So you want to help them too. So I just think that there's more opportunity with undergrads than there is with grads as far as growth is concerned. I really feel that way. And I taught a lot of years of grad students at a lot of 3 different universities. And Steve has our last listener question.
Okay, this is Marty. And this is, again, kind of a gender-neutral name. Marty in Nebraska writes, when lighting dance, do you prefer a black or a gray floor?
Magenta.
Well, okay. So maybe I'm going to surprise you, but I don't know. Here's the ticket, and I don't know if this is true, but I've kind of looked at it, and I kind of think maybe it's true. A gray floor is really good if you're lighting ballet and the people aren't very good. It kind of it hides their footwork a lot. Nothing wrong with black. I've also, the other floor though is white, and I've used white a few times, and that's pretty dynamic. But if I were going to pick one floor, I would pick a brown floor. And Stuttgart Ballet has a brown floor, and the National Ballet in Mexico City has a brown floor. And they are gorgeous. They're just gorgeous. They take color really well. It's dark if you want it dark. It can have that kind of light punch reflective quality of gray if you want that. And I saw another floor in Europe, and I've only seen one of these. I saw a clear floor, and the way they were using it, and this was an opera company, not a dance company, so let me be clear about that. But they had put a drop on the floor, and they had laid the clear floor over it, so they could. And they were in rep, so they could have painted floors for their operas. So there was, a matinee of, I don't know, you pick it, and then an evening performance is something else. And the whole space was transformed by that very elaborate, beautiful painted drop on the floor that was then covered by a translucent or a transparent floor. I did not touch it, and I don't know how they if they taped it together. I just saw it from the auditorium, and the stage manager went, "Oh yeah, that's our clear floor." And I thought, that's a good idea.
Well, I would always use lighter floors if I want to see the light patterns on them. And if I wanted to hide them, I'd use black. That's the only reason why I'd use a gray floor, because if I wanted to see the light on the floor and color the floor and use the floor as another surface texture that you create with light and color and patterns.
It's pretty great to bounce light back up on the subject too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
We don't think about this if we're doing a play. Right. We don't think about are we going to put a black floor down? We think we're going to put down whatever floor is appropriate for the performance.
Cool. Well, the rocking sounds of the Luminoids tells us that once again you spent another morning listening to Light Talk. You can hear our show on Spotify, iTunes, Google, YouTube, and just about every podcast site out there. Check out our website on lighttalk.org for future guests, and be sure to follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast. That way you will not miss a second of Light Talk insanity.
No guarantee is offered regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on this podcast. However,
if you have the passion to litigate us, the law firm Reflect, Flux, Flare, and Glare and their paralegal, Newt, will defend us until our retirement funds are depleted.
Light Talk is written and produced by the Lumen Brothers, coming to you from Long Beach, Gainesville, and from the Republic of Texas.
And be sure to join us next week when we talk about even more happenings in our crazy industry. And maybe we'll know who's the president.
Yeah, all that and a new president. Oh, excuse me, all that and a new sponsor.
Light Talk, broadcasting questionable Lumen knowledge and humor around the world.
So we'll see you all next Saturday morning. Bye-bye from Light Talk.
Adios.